Today's reading is from Romans chapter 1, verses 28 through 32. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind, to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them.
What a list, huh? Kind of depressing a little bit. That's why I had Jerry read it. I didn't want to talk about that stuff. The thing is, when you look at that list, and really the ism, we started our isms last week, the ism we're going to look at today, humanism. You may not be familiar with the word, but I bet you're very familiar with the doctrine or the lifestyle that a humanist puts off and the way they act. We're going to talk about that. If you're not, hopefully in about a half an hour, you'll be much more familiar with it than you were before you came in. Because I'm choosing isms in this series, isms that directly can affect the church, things that we're dealing with here. Things not here necessarily, but on this earth, things that will affect us. And you will see from humanism we're looking at today, it is a virus of sorts. It may not be the Wu flu, but it is a virus that is affecting much of this world. It is a virus that even has its tentacles, if you will, even into the Lord's church at times. It's looking at self more than looking at God. And I want to look at this morning, make some observations for it. I want to get you introduced to this for just a moment. Now, I'll put this up here, and I'll talk about it more on the next slide. Here's some things that I have found out over the years, and again this week looking at it, that humanism does have. Humanism does have this. It has founders, going back to 1927 officially. But really, if you look at their doctrine and you read ancient history, going back to the philosophers of Greece before the New Testament, and even the time of the New Testament, all they've done is just stolen from somebody else. Welcome to the world. You know, Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 1, there is no new thing under the sun, didn't he? And people think they're original. They have a creed. We'll talk about that later. They have a national convention, they have a board of directors, and they have famous alumni. Albert Einstein, one of my favorites, I'm sorry to say, was a humanist. John Dewey, as in the Dewey Decimal System you learned when you were in grade school, was one. And others throughout history and throughout the current date are famous alumni of their little group. You may be surprised, but they're actors in that. People from Hollywood, I know. Humanism, let me brief it up for you for just a moment before we delve too much more deeply. Humanism is a teaching that, it's atheism is what it is. That's why I'm not specifically just going to deal with atheism. I want to wrap it up in this. Humanism is a denial of any supernatural being at all. Humanism says that humankind is the greatest thing that can ever live. We're going to look later at some of their tenets of their doctrine. That we are the greatest thing, we are the greater good, that when we are left alone, and when you remove all rules, all regulations, all things that try to teach us what we're supposed to do, that we will, according to them, evolve into something better than we are now. We're going to be a nicer society. We're going to be a better society. We're going to be a more friendly society. And we're actually going to abide by rules better or by just living better if we don't have rules at all. Yeah, That's kind of what I've thought for years. And I've used this illustration for years too when people say, well, we don't really need rules. We could just get along. Can you imagine what it'd be like in a restaurant? No, I want my food before they do. Well, that's not the way it works. Well, now it works in my book. Because after all, according to humanism, you basically make up your own rules. You can do things the way you want to. I've told you for years. I remember when the teacher would leave the room when we were in school. High school was worse than grade school. My goodness, we had those ceilings, and there were more pencils. Looked like some kind of medieval torture chamber. Pencils in the ceiling, spit wads thrown across. I watched the guy put a whole sheet of notebook paper in his mouth one time and chew it up for a spit wad. Zung that thing across and nearly knocked a guy out with a spit wad. Teacher comes back in. What's going on in here? Because she couldn't tell, I guess. What's going on in here? Of course, you know what we said. Nothing. Pencils falling, paper wads, stuff all over the place. Now, that's a small illustration, folks, of what happens when we don't have rules and regulations just in society alone. It becomes, the word is anarchy. It's without that overarching, really in the word there, rule, something to keep us governed where we can be in that state. Now, I brought this up because I want to bring up this in this next point about this. They claim they are not a religion, but listen to this quote, just one of many. The AHA, that's the American Humanist Association, has a graduate level program in humanism, increasing the preparation of future humanist leaders. The Humanist Institute also offers a plethora of online courses in humanism and trainings for humanist celebrants and activists called the Coker Online Humanist Education Program. It also prepares in-person trainings for key humanist functions such as, now listen to this, officiating a wedding and conducting funerals. Their view on death is interesting. They think you're like Rover and you're dead all over. There's no afterlife. There's nothing to look forward to. And they proudly say amongst all of they've had 3 iterations of a humanist manifesto. There's a creed we'll talk about in a little bit. And they also have other writings that they have. You do a search on Amazon for books about humanism, 10,000 hits come up. I don't know if you can find that many on Christianity or not. They pop up everywhere. But here's the thing. People claim that they're not a religion because they don't believe in a deity or they're not the classic idea of religion. Let me tell you something, folks. Humanism is a very strong and grounded religion. Now, here's the thing about it. Here's why they can do more and atheists and other folks can do more, because they're not the classical religion, so they don't fall under that so-called separation of the church and state, which is not in the Constitution, by the way. Just so we make that clear. That was a letter some years later written that was kind of making commentary on the First Amendment. That is not. But we believe that, right? Well, somebody said it. It must be right. Maybe we ought to read what the founders said. And you know what they were arguing against? A government-run religion. You know what humanism is trying to do? I'll give you one guess. Trying to make a government religion under humanism. Because after all, we're going to be a better people, right? And they push this thing and push these doctrines and push these doctrines, and these things affect us in the church in a lot of different ways. I talked about Christian persecution a few weeks ago. If you recall, I noted that most of what I talked about wasn't the physical, the dying and that sort of thing, but the ways in which we're being persecuted in this country, number one. And it's not that way. They're trying to root us out. They're trying to blend us out. They're trying to do anything they can. And amongst all these other readings on their website and other places about humanism, one thing they try to say, they say very, very adamantly, is that they're going to do everything they can to stop the Christian, and now they say, the Christian advancement that is in, they act like that we're getting all the favors given to us in politics and government. I don't know what news they're reading, but it's sure not the one I read, because we're not getting all the favors at all. It's going quite opposite of what we are. You think there'd be homosexual marriage, you think there'd be abortion, you think there'd be all these other things that are passing left and right, and some other things we don't even know about. Because humanism is leading much of this country in a lot of different ways. They are leading the charge and going away with all morals, all ethical codes, and everything has to come back the way they see it, and they see things as better than anyone else. You know what they don't criticize? I didn't see a word nowhere that all my reading over the years of Judaism, of Buddhism, of all the other isms that are out there, Islam, anything else. But they keep bringing up Christianity. Now, what do you think their number one goal is to try to get rid of? Christianity. But all those others violate their creed as well. Let me look at something for just a moment. You know, they even have in their own literature, they even talk about congregations of humanists. How about that for language that we're very familiar with? They have gatherings, they have congregations, they have those things. Now here's what they say. That's their motto at the very top there. Good without, now notice please they put in there the indefinite article a, good without a God. Because they want to branch out to everybody. Here's a quote from their website. American Humanist Association works to protect rights of humanists, atheists, and other, now listen to the phrasing here, non-theistic Americans. In other words, they say we are being persecuted because of our beliefs, our thoughts, our system, whatever you want to call it. We are being persecuted for that. I beg to differ. I beg to differ. They are not being persecuted at all. Maybe at one time they had a lot more opposition than they do now in this country. The first Humanist Manifesto was written in 1933. And granted, this world was a lot different as far as spirituality in 1933 than it is now, I can assure you. But here's some of the preferred nomenclature. Non-theist, atheist, but that last one is one that really sticks out at me. You'll see a lot in their writings. Free thinkers, because after all, we're not free thinkers. You know why? Because we cling to an old book with old ideas, with old thoughts, and old religion, and old prophets, and all those old things. And the one thing we'll talk about a little bit later that humanists like is they like the idea and very proud to be progressive or evolving. They're very big on that term too. They like to say that how much they change when they look at other things. Now, folks, listen. They don't think that we're free thinkers. They don't think that we can have a thought in our minds, but it's not a biblical thought. I say thank you. Thank you very much. We have a guiding principle, and I think it's more important we have a guiding principle that doesn't change. What they do is let the world dictate everything that they think and everything that they believe. Here it is, the ethical and life-affirming worldview of humanism, which, now here it is, without belief in gods or other supernatural forces. Now notice what they do. Encourages individuals to live informed and meaningful lives that inspire to the greater good of humanity. And let's stop for just a moment. I mentioned about their views on life. This life is all that we have. When you go back to 1 Corinthians 15, Paul quotes all the way back from Isaiah chapter 22, that if this is all that we have, then we should eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. Now, he's not proposing that that's the way we live, but he's quoting back from Isaiah chapter 22, where God through Isaiah said that's how Judah sees life. They don't see it as living for me. They don't see it as a repentant state. They don't see it as worshiping only me. They see it as the heathen nations around them do. To eat and live and to be happy and joyful because tomorrow we may die. Get everything out of this life that you can because there's nothing else. And that is exactly what a humanist idea teaches, folks. And that's one of those things that does infiltrate the Lord's body at times. How many times do we get upset because we didn't get to do something fun? It was canceled. Oh, that virus canceled it. Or oh, weather canceled it. Or oh, something else. Is it really that bad because we missed our ski weekend? Because we missed our whatever else? Where's our hope and glory, folks? Last time I read the New Testament, it was pointing upward to heaven, not down here. Do we enjoy our life? Yes, absolutely we do. But look at the idea that humanism puts out. They believe in that good death. Now that goes way back into Grecian and then into Roman philosophies too, of a good death, of dying an honorable death, of just going on and letting go and taking care of this. And they talk about how they can go, and they like to comfort people that are dying with basically this motto right here, that you've lived a great, informed, and meaningful life, and you've inspired the greater good of humanity, and that you've had a great life. What if you have someone that's on their deathbed that they've lived a miserable life? That they're lying there, and if you ever look into the eyes of those people that know they're about to die, when you look into the eyes of a Christian, you see a whole lot different spark than you do of folks that are about to die that don't have that assurance that we do. And that assurance that we have in the afterlife, folks, sparks this life even greater. We see things in a different light. We don't see, oh man, we got to go no matter what. We got to get out and have fun today. Go, 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 because we don't have anything else. What a miserable life that is. That's all I can see is the here and now. And if I get cancer and die at 35, I've missed out on my good life. But oh well, I've had fun. That doesn't comfort the dying. Not 1 ounce. It portrays that way in movies and novels and that sort of thing. But folks, when reality of death and stepping into another world, another life, if you will, hits people, they question their humanity. They question their ideologies. And they question whatever faith they may have if it's right. And one thing that the Christian faith gives is assurance from beginning to end that we have not only a good life now, but folks, we've got the best life after. That's when all the great living comes in. That's when all those things we've talked about come to play. And again, that affects our mindset even now and how we look at things. So if I look at things like this, folks, I'm not looking at it with the greatest eye that I can have. I'm looking at it from really what's called a fatalist. We're not going to talk about fatalism, but that's the idea of a fatalist. A fatalist says, well, it's fate. There's nothing I can do to change it. These things are going to happen, and that's the way it is. In medieval Europe, it was a big really teaching in medieval Europe. You used to call it weird, W-Y-R-D. And you can see why we got the word weird out of that too. It was weird is the way they used to refer to it. They have a trinity here, and here it is. Reason, observation, and then science. Now, let me discuss those for just a moment before we look at those passages. They believe that the human mind, that our reasoning power is the greatest, that along with science in particular, is the greatest, part of that greatest trinity upon this earth. That they say that you have to reason everything out. In other words, no matter what comes to the fore, no matter what is happening, if I'm facing death, if I'm facing life, I'm facing a decision, stop and reason it out. I don't disagree with reason, folks, I can assure you. I don't think anyone in here does. But I can't use that as putting it over here in place of good, sound judgment and knowing what is right and wrong. And I certainly can to put my faith in that for life on this earth. Let me tell you why. For one reason. Because very seldom do you find two people that have the exact same reasoning about something like that. So then I become, like I said a moment ago, I am my own deity. If I see it this way, then that's the way it's going to be. If you see it that way, then that's the way it's going to be. If he sees it another way, that's okay too. So then there's no objective truth, which is really what we're denying in this. Any objective truth, everything is subjective. It's subject to the situation I'm in. Well, yeah, it's wrong to just walk in and just shoot somebody in their home for no reason. But if I didn't like them, then, it's subjective to say, yeah, I can do that. And, of course, with abortion and other things that are going on, euthanasia, you remember the name Jack Kevorkian? He was a humanist. Can you imagine that? Just take life and snuff it out for no reason. And others were too. And you see this now, folks, right? Looking back, you can see why he says, what's the difference? Let's have this good, honorable death and just take you out right now. Call it assisted suicide if you want to. I know what the Lord calls it. Flat out murder. But when I see this life as all that I'm going to have, yet again, that's where it is. I think about it in Romans. We had a longer passage read earlier, in Jeremiah both, but especially there in Romans. He's dealing with a situation, especially beginning about verse 19 all the way at the end of the chapter, dealing with the world pre-law of Moses and how people began to act. The law of Moses wasn't written down. Now, they had law. They had the patriarchal law. God spoke to the heads of fathers. But we see the world reading through, even up through the first few chapters of Genesis, the world deteriorating morally. Things were going on. People were doing things they shouldn't be doing. And it was completely getting out of hand. That's why we read about a flood. Let's get somebody's attention, and what better way to do it? And the flood comes along, but here's the thing. But people were doing what they want to do. They changed the glory of God, the incorruptible God, into the image of a corruptible man. Now notice what they did. They said, here's God over here, but we don't need that because really we're God to ourselves. We are the ones that can decide right and wrong. We are the ones that can put a system of ethics out here. We are the ones that can make decisions on things of life and death. And we're seeing no different. That's why I chose that passage. That's the same thing we're seeing with the humanistic philosophy is it doesn't matter. If we think it's okay, it's okay. If we think it's okay to charge into someone's living room and shoot them square between the eyes, that's okay because we've justified it. They tend to run after cultural trends. If you read the Humanist Manifesto of 1933, to Humanist Manifesto number 2 to Humanist Manifesto number 3, written in the early 2000s. When you start looking through there, you see an evolution of thought. If I were a humanist, if a humanist from 1933 were still alive and wanted to be a humanist today, he wouldn't qualify, because their doctrine has evolved that much. Not to mention, it goes by cultural popularity, biases, that sort of thing is how it goes. Now, stop with me and think about that. That's their wording, not mine, by the way. They believe in looking at the popular culture. Now, here's the thing. If I look at it that way, if I look at it from the way they see it, a better life, and here's the quote from them again, advocating progressive values and equality for humanists, atheists, and free thinkers. Now, here's the thing we just talked about a moment ago. When I look at that and I have that understanding of the way, their understanding of the way to see things, that's what I'm seeing it as. Everything's all up to me. Better life is mine. And they base it on current trends of culture, popularity, etc. In 1933, I mentioned this earlier for a reason. You know what wasn't popular? LGBTQ plus A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You know what else wasn't popular? Euthanasia. You know what else wasn't popular? Abortion. Right? It started. Margaret Sanger, by the way, who started Planned Parenthood way back when, was one of the Humanists of the Year in the 1950s. Yeah, she was a eugenicist. You know that? She was trying to actually remove the black people from this country. Her words, not mine. But yet they celebrate her like she's the best person in the world. I beg to differ, but I digress. But you see what we're seeing with humanist theology, humanist doctrine, if you will. They are religion as much as anybody else is. And they praise all these worthless people in the world. All they want to do is cause harm, but yet, as Margaret Sanger said, I'm really doing it for the good of mankind. They can convince themselves that when I do bad things, it's good. Seemed like Isaiah said something about that, didn't he? They're calling good evil and evil good. And that's exactly what we're seeing with this type of thing. So that's what happens when you stay with a book that doesn't change. We can quote those passages to it, and they fit just as well now as it did 2,700 years ago when Isaiah said it. But humanist doctrine can't even last 70 or 80 years, and it changes night and day. I like consistency in my life, folks. I don't want to change with the whims of society. Now look at what they said there again. That's what they're trying to, those free thinkers again. Here's what we talked about a moment ago, but think about those two passages with me for just a moment. In Romans 12 and verse 1 and 2, really, you have Paul there. He is beseeching the Roman church, Jew and Gentile congregation there. Beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercy of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God. Now, here's the reason why, because this is our, now watch the word with me for just a moment. Reasonable is usually how that word is translated. Reasonable service, work we have to do. But please notice that word reasonable is translated correctly, because the Greek word is, in English, would be Logikos, logikos. Sounds like logical, right? Logic and reason are the same thing. I saw a guy the other day had bumper sticker, as a matter of fact, when I was looking at this again. And the back of it said he believed in logic and reason. I thought, well, if you did, you know that one meant the other, and you wouldn't be redundant. But you'd think when an evolved people, they would know what redundancies are, wouldn't you? But I digress again. Let's look back at what we're looking at here. Understanding it. Paul said it's your reasonable service. Also have John 1 and verse 1. Understanding that God, that the Word became flesh and dwelled among us. Now that word, in these first few verses in chapter 1, translated as word, is almost the same word as reasonable. Now, to a Greek mindset in late first century, they fully, and John writing to a very broad audience of Greek philosophers, of theists, of other different kinds of people out there who are very religious. And he says, the reason, listen to it, the first definition of the word logos is reason in English. Not word as in a literal word, though that's one of the definitions. But the first definition the Greeks would have noticed is that the word, that the reason became flesh and dwelt among us. They worshiped reason in ancient Greek philosophies. They thought reason was the highest God. Sound familiar? They thought it was the highest God, and they worshiped reason, and they wrote essays for pages and pages and pages and pages and books and books and books about how great reason was. And when John writes this sentence, look at how hard this hits Grecian philosophy of his day. When the Word became flesh, when reason became flesh. You know what the Greeks often thought? That their gods took on human flesh and came down to earth. But you know what those gods did when they came down to earth? They raped women, they destroyed villages, they killed people they didn't like, all that sort of thing. But you know what the God, the only God, did when He came to earth? To seek and to save that which was lost. Matter of fact, in John chapter 1 and verse 29, they look out and see Jesus coming. It said, behold the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world. Now look at the vast difference when the true reason comes to earth in Jesus Christ. It wasn't to rape women. It wasn't to pillage somebody's town over here. It wasn't to exert some kind of authority that He didn't really have. It wasn't just to be a bully, but to come down with the greatest heart ever known and to save us from our sins. I don't find that in any of these isms that we're going to look at today. You know, we talked last week, racism was part of our study last week, and how racism, for one, it's misused greatly. And thrown around, like I said last week, it's almost lost its meaning. But the idea of looking at racism, looking at those things, looking at prejudice, whatever you want to call it, let me reiterate something I said last week. If I want to get rid of that stuff, and they claim that reading the Bible and believing in old things like that is what creates racism and disharmony and that sort of thing, you're not going to find a book on earth that dismantles the argument for racism in the Bible. Or any of these isms, for humanism, for whatever, Marxism, whatever you want to call it. God has got it in control. And we have to dust off those books and look and see what God has given us. They're not that dusty after all, are they? I hope not. How are we going to handle what's being brought before us? We have an understanding then about what true reason is, folks. The credo is short. This is their words again, not mine. Humanist answers are the best we have available to us and are simply more effective than those from worldviews trapped by their unchanging ancient texts, subject to the personal biases inherent in divine revelations. So, advancing humanism is a key component to achieving positive transformations in our world. You'll see two Latin words in there in parenthetical statements there, S-I-C, seek. That's how it appears in the original, because you would think that masterly evolved brain is smarter than they are, would know where you put a comma and where you don't put a comma. I'm sorry, but you got to bring that up, right? When they're claiming to be better, smarter than we are, they can't even follow the rules of grammar. They're in the wrong place. First one shouldn't be there, and the second one needs one there. You don't start out with a coordinated conjunction and don't put a comma after it. Come on. Right? But again, I digress. But I just have to point out things like that because people act like they're so much wiser than we are, yet they make all these mistakes all the time. And you can read that in any grammar book at any junior high school or less. But anyway, besides all of that, I'm off my soapbox now. They say that their answers are the best we have available to us and more effective than those from other worldviews. Is that right? So the best thing I can tell somebody that's on their deathbed is, bye. Nice knowing you. You think about it. That's the best thing. Or is it better to say, it's been great knowing you, and let go, brother. Just let go. We don't have any trouble saying that to people, right? Go on, I'll see you again. And you're going to say, what took you so long? Look what you've been missing, right? Now, you mean to tell me that's not better than reaching over and saying, bye, that's it? Glad you had a good life? Not in anybody's book. They may trumpet it. They may say the things that they do, folks, but that's not the way people believe. People are afraid of death, especially when they're without Jesus. They don't look at those same things about it as well. See, they want to advance humanism, a key component to achieving positive transformations in our world. Let me give you a short commentary on that. We want to take over the world and how worldview to be the only one we have. You read more of the literature, and that's exactly what you're going to see. We think we should have the only worldview. It is very progressive, and I mentioned this earlier. I want to look at it for just a moment. Very progressive doctrine, because here's what they teach. They're always evolving with current culture. They look at things around and they say, oh, well, now we've got to be, and they use the whole humanitarian rights, equal rights, all the same arguments we've been seeing for years. And they say, we've got to change with this. And when you start reading their modern writings from writings 70, 80 years ago, you see that in there. But you know what? What if the world were to switch? What if our culture were to change and sin were to go by the wayside? People started living godlier lives, and 90% of the world was at least professing Christians and didn't swear, didn't do any of the things, all this other stuff we think of as a non-Christian would do. Would they update their value system then? Because by their own writings, they say we've got to go with the culture and the persuasion. Now, that's a valid argument. They like reason, after all, or logic, whatever they want to call it. But you see the point? Would they update then if the culture in which they were living were a godly, theistic culture? I think we know the answer. You know why this started and their little religion started? So they have a way out of having to live that kind of life anyway. And now they can base it on reason because apparently the Bible isn't reasonable enough for them. You know, they play the victim card a lot. We're being persecuted all the time. We're being persecuted all the time. We don't get things to happen like this. Things don't go our way. People are trying to make us do away with us and going on and on and on and on. And then they proceed to just try to destroy Christianity throughout all the writings, throughout all their teachings, and their congregations, by the way. Humanism, they say, is a positive worldview that has, now I put in there the word faith. Positive worldview that has the potential, notice he says, to transform political and cultural life in one that embraces justice, equality, and better living for all. Now think about that with me for just a moment, folks. Think about the way they word it there, has the potential. If I have faith, if I believe in this system, now listen, the word creed means I believe, or a belief system. It's a credo, it's a belief system. The word faith really means believe. And all they're trying to do is to get us to believe their way of life. They want us to follow their faith. Don't let people tell you that things aren't a religion when they are. I believe atheism itself is a religion. I believe a lot of things in the political climate we're seeing today have all the elements of a religion. And that's the way, folks, they get away with it. Well, we're not a religion, so we can say things. You know, I'm limited to what I can say from the pulpit as far as political views. Do you know that? Well, they'd come in here and arrest me and would love it. Some of you might, I don't know. But they would love to shut up a Christian preacher. They would love to. And they're trying to in all the ways that they can. Let's finish with this. We've had all those ugly quotes. It's time for a good one, wouldn't you say? Amen. It's time for a good quote. Notice something that Paul said here. It's something that I've kind of iterated throughout the sermon this morning. If in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most pitiable. Now, pitiable used in the original context is a lot different than we use it today. We're worthy of pity because we don't have any hope, is the idea. Keep in mind in 1 Corinthians, that's the idea. It's about the resurrection. But if I were to sum up 1 Corinthians 15 in one word, I would sum it up with hope. And the reason we have hope is in there. Because the reason came to this earth in human form, Jesus Christ. We have the Word dwelling among us. He took on flesh. He was in the beginning before God. And He is God. And God came down to see us. And why? To save us from our sins. To give us that true reason that people have looked for before Him for centuries, for millennia. Yet He came to earth just for us. Just to give us that hope. Just to give us the reason to believe. The reason to keep living. The reason to keep going through hard times in this life. Folks, when we have hard times, and all of us do, no matter if you're a humanist, an atheist, or a Christian, or anything else, we have difficulties in life. And I beg to differ severely when they said we can't find the answers in ancient text, but in what their present worldview is. Because it just doesn't address what we need to hear. That does. Because you know what he's saying there in the rest of the chapter of 1 Corinthians 15? That we have hope. That we have assurance. That we know that through Jesus Christ we have those things. And when I'm lying on my deathbed, or you're lying on your deathbed, that when that hope is given to us, folks will smile. They will. They will chuckle. They will agree with you because they realize the hope that rests within us, Paul says. And that's that hope that Jesus gave us. I can't find it in a creed of men, manifesto, whatever they want to call it. I can't find it in anything, any human philosophy. Human philosophers have been teaching the same thing, and I mean almost verbatim, the same thing they have for millennia. And you know why it fails and has to be resurrected? Fails and has to be resurrected because it never holds water. It never gives hope. It never gives people what Jesus can only give. And it still holds. People have held the faith in Jesus Christ for nearly 2,000 years. And we're just as strong now as we were then. Because it's the truth. You know, the Bible's never gone out of print. Never has. It's always been around in one way or another. The faith has always been around in one way or another. People see that and people believe in it, folks. Humanism isn't the answer, but Christ is. If you're here today and you're not a child of God, listen to me. The Bible teaches, that old book they kept talking about teaches us this, that when I put my faith in Jesus Christ and live my life for Jesus Christ, which is a better life anyway. Think about it, folks. If I live a life what the Bible teaches, I don't have to worry about STDs. I don't have to worry about liver cancer. I don't have to worry about so many other things that people have to worry about in this life because I don't do those things. I'm not involved in those situations. I'm even going to have a better life now. You ever watched anybody die of one of those things? It's a horrific way to go and it takes a long time to do it. God doesn't make sure we can avoid most of those things. Bad things happen to good people, I know that. But it's the best life now, and it's by far the best life hereafter. If you have need today, why don't you come while we stand and while we sing?